Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. I've had the good fortune to travel the world learning about yoga therapy on a global scale, and I've been able to meet many of the leaders in the field along the way. I want to share with you what I'm learning as I interview our colleagues from around the world. My hope is that together we can reduce suffering of all sentient beings through our work as yoga teachers and yoga therapists. Welcome to our show today with the lovely Anjali Deva, who is an Ayurvedic practitioner and teacher in Los Angeles, California. And her practice is called the Rooted Rasa, Rooted Rasa. And I've known Anjali for several years now. We've done a lot of great work together, and we have big plans to continue working together in the future. And one of the things I love about Anjali, and that she and I are so copacetic on, is this specialization in integrative Ayurveda as well as yoga therapy, and that it's a trauma-informed approach. She is such a compassionate person, and she is really into using Ayurveda to help us with mental health disorders like anxiety, depression, PTSD. And then, of course, all of that flows into digestive disorders and women's health issues. So she has been trained in a very classical way from a young age by her father, Arun Deva. And she's also worked at Hope Integrative Psychiatry to use Ayurveda for mental health. So it's just such a beautiful bridge to the optimal state yoga therapy program, because those are all the things that we care about too. So one of the things that I wanted to have Anjali talk about was this idea of our mind is very, very impacted by the food that we eat. And I personally worked with Anjali for quite some time to reestablish my relationship with food. And that's what you're going to hear all about in this podcast, how it was that we worked together to help me have a new relationship with food, a nourishing relationship with food. And that is so important because it affects not just our body, and I was having some chronic pain at the time, but it also affects how our mind works. And we all know that when we're feeling anxious or depressed, basically our life doesn't go as well. Our relationships don't unfold as well. And so this idea that what we eat actually impacts our mind is just super critical to yoga therapy. And that's why at the end of the show, Anjali and I are going to share kind of a special announcement that we haven't talked about publicly before, helping everyone to see how combining Ayurveda with yoga therapy is really the best way to go. And that she and I have a really cool project that we're working on, and hopefully we'll have ready to go within the next year. So let's just spend a few minutes looking at this idea from the Taittiriya Upanishad. It's chapter 2, and it's where we get the idea of the Panchamaya model, the 5 layers of the human system. And this summer, I took a wonderful class with Nritya from the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. She took our optimal state faculty and some few special friends that we invited through the entire, basically, Panchamaya Kosha model from the Taittiriya Upanishad, and helped us to understand specifically what is happening with the bird model. Some of you know the bird model, the wings, the head, the tail, the core of the bird, and how that shows up on the physical layer, the pranic layer or the subtle body, the mental emotional layer, the wisdom layer, the life experience layer. Sometimes we call that the personality. And then also the spiritual layer, the faith layer, that type of thing. So we went through very, very specifically what was going on in every layer of the human system. You can see I'm putting on the screen a ton of notes from this wonderful class that we took with Nritya. So I really also got a good idea from these teachings that Nritya taught about the Annamaya, the first physical layer. That basically, what is that about? It's about the body is nourished by food, and without good nourishing food, we cannot survive. And that food is considered the medicine that will heal illness. Food also has a really close connection to what we call the Jatara Agni, which is at the navel center. The Jatara Agni, this fire inside of us at the navel center, is responsible for our metabolism. And that there's a big connection between what we're eating and how our metabolism actually functions. And we can use food and herbs to get the metabolism or the Jatara Agni functioning well. Also, in this class that I took with KYM, they told us that all creatures are born from food, and that the food the mother and the father are eating as they lead up to conception actually matters, how healthy they are. And a lot of times in the Indian traditions, there'll be a 3 or a 6 month period where the mother and the father are preparing themselves to have the most potent sperm and egg possible to come together for conception, and really eating a clean yet nourishing diet to make that happen. So there's so many things that could be said about food and how important it is, but I think I'm going to just go right into the show with Anjali and let her tell you. My hope is that you will see her brilliance, her magnificence, her compassion. You will consider joining her either on your private journey to reestablish your relationship with food, which she does privates all the time, or maybe you'll consider joining her course to become an Ayurvedic wellness counselor. And that's the one that we have some exciting news coming up, how her program and our Optimal State Yoga Therapy program hopefully will be working together so you can get more than one certification in yoga therapy and Ayurvedic wellness counseling, hit multiple areas with the combination of our two trainings. So we'll talk more about that at the end of the episode. I introduce you to the lovely Anjali. I am here with Anjali Deva and feeling really happy to talk to you today and share your wisdom and your compassion with our listeners. And I just want to start by telling a little story about Anjali and I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Do you remember how long it was?
It must have been 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, somewhere around there.
So I kept reading in all these yogic texts how it's very, very important to have our food in order. Nourishing food, fresh food, local food, correct portion size, all the things around food, because food is one of the primary things that affects our mind. And as a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist and someone who wants to be in sattva as much as possible, I was like, wow, I really need to reestablish my relationship with food. Because at that point, I was so stressed out. I don't know if you remember, I was so stressed out from my job at the university. And it just felt like I was running all day. Like I'd get there at 7 a.m. and then I wouldn't be able to eat until like 4 p.m. But then my blood sugar was off and I'd make the wrong choices. I mean, there's just nothing nourishing about my pattern that I had. And so I came to you and said, help me, I need some help. And ever since then, I'm not saying I have a perfect diet, but I have a very different relationship with food. So welcome. We're so glad you're here. Will you tell us a little bit about you and your philosophy and how you help people reestablish their relationship with food?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner in Los Angeles, and I really enjoy working with clients who are interested, like you said, in reestablishing their relationship with food, but also this deeper understanding of how our food impacts our body and our minds, and really relying on this philosophy that everything we come in contact with has an effect on us. And so how we eat really starts to become a part of who we are and how we interact with the world. So I see clients and I like to work with food in really what I hope is a simple kind of way. I'm really lately been really passionate about healing as being very simple, coming back to the basics, like you said, eating fresh, eating seasonal, eating local foods, and having that really be the foundation for our relationship with food. I think most of the food that's available to us right now is packaged, is processed, is complicated, is not necessarily the most aesthetic for us. So to help us come back to this foundational understanding of, food is us. We take in food, it builds our cells, it builds our tissues, it builds our mind, our emotions. Not only that, but how we interact with the people around us. And an easy way to think about that is if I'm eating well, I tend to be in a better mood and I'm more loving and compassionate and available for the person that I'm going to have a conversation with. But if I'm running on coffee and sugar and tired and a little bit irritable, I might not be as available in my relationship. So I really see food as the foundation for everything in our lives. And to come back to just the simple practice of how can I eat what's local, what's organic, what's seasonal, what really calls to me and also my individual constitution. Yeah.
I think that's what's so incredible is this idea of individual constitution and what do each of us need. It could be so different. I mean, if you just look at you and I, we have completely different constitutions, and we probably need very different nourishment to keep us grounded or lighter. Like I feel like I need lighter foods. I just feel better when I have lighter foods, where maybe with your constitution, you might need something a little heavier and grounding at times. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll say, what I've been finding really interesting is that the natural world gives us what we need in the seasons. So, in the fall, we get these beautiful root vegetables, which help us feel more grounded. In the summertime, we get a lot of cucumbers, which help us feel more cool. And if we are able to pay attention to those rhythms, we're often given what we need. But that being said, we also have these individual constitutions where if I have a little bit more air in my constitution, I'm going to need things that are more grounding, like you said, heavier, unctuous, that kind of help bring me down. Or if I have a little bit more earth or water in my constitution, then I do want things that are going to help me to feel lighter, to get moving a little bit more easily, to help motivate me to get up in the morning. And if I have that fiery type of constitution, then I really have to be careful with things that are acidic or heating, because those might aggravate or inflame my body. So knowing about our individual constitutions can help us also navigate those seasonal routines. Yeah, it's a really nice way to kind of integrate and make it more individualized in that way.
So this may be a question you don't really want to talk about, but I think it's something we need to talk about if you're willing. And that is bowel movements. I mean, I think everything we need to know about how our nourishment and digestion is going for us individually shows up in the bowel movement. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think very few people really want to look in the toilet bowl. Right. But I actually have an app that really? Every day I put in the texture, the color, so I can see what's happening in my body.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love talking about poop. I do it all day long. I might have shared this with you. I even had a client once who, this might be gross to some, but had a bowel movement that was heart-shaped, and she sent me a photo of it.
I love that.
Yeah, it was a little strange, but our bowel movements, I think about it like our report card every day. It really gives us, insight into how we are digesting, how we're processing, how our body is functioning. And if you have a baby or a puppy, you're very aware of that. You're also paying attention to the bowel movements quite a lot. But in our body, according to Ayurveda, there's sort of this standard that we want to aim towards, which would be a brown, banana-shaped bowel movement that might float. It doesn't have too much odor, and it's got this kind of nice quality. You feel good after going to the bathroom. But that's not the case for everybody. And actually, a lot of Americans suffer from digestive imbalances, let's say. So if you had more vata or more air in your constitution, you might see a harder stool, a smaller stool. You might even have a hard time going. Maybe you skip a day or a couple days, but there's this dry, hard, dark kind of quality to it. Whereas with pitta, a little bit more fire in the constitution, we're going to see a looser or softer stool, and that can range in texture, maybe from like frozen yogurt to something very watery, quite a softer stool. And it might have different colors in it. It might be more yellow or orange or green. Those are typically the colors that we would see there. And with kapha, it might be a more robust bowel movement, but you might have trouble in passing. It might not feel quite complete, or after going to the bathroom, it feels like you might have a little bit more to go. So how we, look at our bowel movements so that we can see the color and the texture, but also how we feel after going to the bathroom is really important also. We should feel light and energized after.
Maybe this is TMI, but it's my podcast, so I get to do that. I think I had COVID in March of 2020, and my bowel movements have been very vata-like ever since. And it's been not a fun journey. Yeah. But I think within the last week or two, I finally am back on track. And I mean, that's a long time to have your system off and, try to work with why things aren't, moving through with ease, Yeah,
absolutely. And there's so many factors that can impact our bowel movements. Often we think about it just as our food and what we're eating, but it's also our environment, the weather, how much water we're eating, if we're comfortable. I mean, think about if you're, in an environment like, a dorm room where you don't have total privacy in the bathroom, even that can impact your bowel movement. So there's so many factors that impact it outside of food, but absolutely going through something like COVID can definitely affect your system in that way for a while.
Yeah. And, everybody's talking about how COVID is giving diarrhea, but I'm talking to so many students that are having constipation, but nobody's talking about that. And I think the reason is Americans, at least, are just chronically constipated. So they probably don't even realize that it has a connection.
Yeah.
Or could have a connection.
Agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also, it's more socially acceptable to be constipated than to have diarrhea, right? If you don't go to the bathroom, that might actually even be a good thing to some people. So yeah, and I had the same experience. I actually got COVID in December, and I also was on the more vata side, which is very unusual for my constitution. So
yeah. So everybody, we're putting that out there. COVID impacts the bowels. But I think you're right.
To your poop.
I think you're right about it's, it's not just the food that's nourishing, but what news are we watching? Yeah. Who are we spending our time with? Our sangha? Are we stressing ourselves out because of work or whatnot? Like all of that is actually considered input, sensory input into the system. Just Absolutely. Like you eat something, you read something, you see something. I mean, I really find, at least with my yoga therapy clients, that when these things happen, it's multiple layers of input that is causing the problem. It's not just eat more fiber, drink more water.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think because our digestive system is so greatly influenced by our nervous system, we have this gut brain that's so highly intelligent. It is paying attention to, and it's also influenced by every, like you said, sensory input that we take in. And so whether that is watching a stressful TV show, having an argument with my partner, or, maybe I'm just busy at work and I don't have time to go to the bathroom. That can also be, a way that we start to change our digestive system and cause a little bit of imbalance. Things that might be minor, but over time really add up.
I know so many teachers and so many nurses that chronically there's nobody to stay in the classroom, or there's nobody to take over for you to take a break as a nurse. And so it's like 6, 8, 10, 12 hours of holding.
Mm-hmm.
I personally see that leading to things like autoimmune, fibromyalgia. I mean, I really think that that connection
Mm-hmm.
is there. And if you think about it, it's the toxic waste in the body, the mala.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, in Ayurveda, we always say don't suppress your natural urges, whether that's the need to sneeze, cough, go to the bathroom. Don't suppress that. It'll lead to disease. And of course, we have to be, within reason with that. But going to the bathroom when you need to go is really important. And I know a lot of people need to hear that.
Yeah. We give you permission to go.
Set your boundary, go to the bathroom.
I used to be kind of someone who was rushing around in the morning a lot because there's just so much to do before you go to work. And now I'm like, it's worth getting up a half an hour earlier to have ease, to have time to sit, to have time to relax and breathe and feel, and maybe even do a little oil massage on my belly. All those things just set us up for the day. And recently I was reading how when you're constipated, the prana is actually moving up instead of down like it's supposed to. And that when you finally have the bowel movement and it exits your body, your mind is impacted by that. Your mind becomes less vata and settles down. Have you ever heard that? That was kind of interesting to me.
I hadn't heard that, but it makes total sense to me. Absolutely, for clearing that passageway. And it also made me think, it's a silly example, but after my cat goes to the bathroom, she gets the zoomies, right? She has so much excitement and energy, and it's like this clearing away. She feels light and happy, and
oh my God.
I think we have that too.
I sometimes get the zoomies in the morning. I love that. But I mean, that shows us that even her mind is affected.
Totally.
Animals don't lie.
No, they can't.
Oh, so we know we need to have regular, great bowel movements. And that's a big part of what you do with people, is help them regulate that part of their system.
Yeah.
But the thing that you are working with me on, which I really appreciated and found so interesting, is that nature provides what our systems need in the local area at a certain time of year. So, for example, if raspberries are starting to bloom in my town where I live, that's what my immune system needs from my environment at this moment in time, which is why we want to have local, right? Yeah. So when I worked with you, this idea of we're going to kind of change the types of foods that I was eating throughout different seasons of the year, and actually try new vegetables and try new fruits and add more grains here and more fruits there, like to go with the season so that my body gets exactly what it needs in Lake Arrowhead, California in any given season. So could you kind of take us around a year, like maybe starting in the late summer, because that's where we are right now, and talk about the types of foods that are good, and then kind of just walk us through the seasons to give us an example of what that might look like, knowing that it could be totally different for people in the Southern Hemisphere, right? Because they're flipped. But at least you're in Los Angeles, I'm in Lake Arrowhead. So can you walk us through that just to kind of give us an example of what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with summer, the season that we just went through. And in summer, we really want to think about it as mid-year, midlife, kind of this pitta time where our fire is at its highest. It's really at its peak. And during that time, we want to eat foods that are cooling, that are hydrating, that are going to help us bring down the fire so that we don't overheat and start to dry ourselves out. So foods, for example, that might fit into that would be stone fruit, that raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, all of these really hydrating, easy to digest fruits. In terms of vegetables, things like cucumbers, green beans, these easy to digest beans that are growing fresh, so they're not dried. Those are available in the summertime. And another thing that we want to think about that's actually really interesting and not often talked about is that our Agni is actually the lowest in the summertime.
Well,
and
I
Yeah.
want you to say that because you said your fire is the highest, but the Agni is the lowest. And that
Mhm.
I think confuses people. So could you just tell us a brief summary of that? They can come to
Yeah.
you if they want more.
Sure. I always like to joke that one of like the pop quizzes in Ayurveda is what's the difference between the fire element or pitta element and Agni. And it's really that, one is oily and the other is dry.
Mm.
And so there's a little bit of a difference in how those function in our body and what they do. It's not hugely different, but what happens is that our Agni in the summertime, our digestive fire becomes weak because it's so hot outside that our fire is spreading out towards the skin so that we sweat, and that sweat helps us to cool down. So this heat becomes really dispersed. It doesn't stay as contained as we would like it to be. And I always remember when I was studying Ayurveda with Robert Svoboda and Claudia Welch, they used to say, protect your Agni. That it's not so much about strengthening or cleansing or doing all of these things that we hear about in the West, but it's really about protecting your Agni. And I think that that's really applicable here. How are we maintaining and containing the Agni so that this little fire is able to stay strong in the summertime? So interestingly enough, things like tomatoes and peppers and chilies grow in the summertime, which can be counterintuitive, right? Why am I eating these spicy things when it's hot out and that's going to increase my heat? But there's two reasons for that. One is that they will help you sweat so that you're able to cool down. And the other is that they are actually stimulating your Agni. So if your Agni is really low, it could help you stimulate your Agni so that you have more digestive capacity at that time. Now, the caveat, and I think where it starts to get complicated, is that if you have out of balance pitta in your constitution, that might not be the right advice for you.
Yeah, because what would strengthen the Agni would also strengthen the dry fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that there's different ways of applying this to every individual constitution, but we can kind of get a feel for what to do in that season. So,
Well, and I think that's why it's so important to work with someone like you through a year of seasons. Like I learned this from you. And so now when my bowel movements go towards the kapha direction, especially kind of clay-like, hard, hard to move out. I even in the summertime will go to some spicy food, and that will usually be the trick. Which before I would never have thought spicy food in August. That's crazy. But now I'm using it medicinally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so in the summertime, that's kind of what we want to focus towards. And another thing that I want to say is that these joints, these sandhis in between the seasons, are really important times too. So often we think about the summer and then the fall, but we have this kind of 2 to 4 week period where pitta is kind of moving out, vata is coming in, and there's this kind of change over. And that's the time that we really want to pay attention. That's, I think about it like that's when we're setting up for the next season. It's when we're kind of getting ready. We want to invite in vata really nicely. It's the changeover. It's the shift change.
And so what do you want us to do to set the stage for vata to come in?
It's a great question. So I would say across the board, whenever we're in these joints, so the solstices and the equinox are a good way to remember that. That's when we want to eat really simple. Maybe do a couple of days of khichdi or just only fresh and local veggies with some healthy grains to really kind of simplify your diet. And I don't want to go too far into what you can do because there's a lot of cleanses and things that are available at that time, but really just simplifying, I think, does it for most people. Hydrating well.
Or even hot water.
Yeah.
Maybe just have some warm water all day for 3 days. I mean, we'd love you to do that every day, but that might be a nice way to kind of break down some of the toxins. And
yeah,
I like to keep things very simple for people. Yeah, just drink hot water this week.
Yeah, hot water, eat vegetables.
Yeah,
make sure every meal has a vegetable. So then vata starts to come in and we get this really effervescent, drying, fast moving, quick capacity. And so at that time, we want to start to think about, most importantly, how am I hydrating So not
Mhm.
only with water, but oil, am I getting enough healthy fats in my diet? Because what I want to be most aware of at this time is that I might dry out. I might start to notice more dry skin. I might start to notice more constipation. So how do I really stay hydrated by including things like ghee, olive oil, salmon if you eat fish, avocado, things that can be really healthy fats are going to be important. And then I want to partner that with herbs or spices that are warming. So things like ginger, cumin, turmeric, these are going to help warm the body because Vata is cold, but they're also going to help us digest these healthy fats, which can be a little bit heavy. So as our Agni is now starting to strengthen a little bit, we want to help stimulate it. We want to help it strengthen. So our digestive spices with our healthy fats, our root vegetables, which help us to ground and feel really supported at this time of year when things can feel a little bit shaky. So sweet potatoes, regular potatoes. There's so many different varieties of potatoes. If you really go to a farmer's market, it's amazing. But radishes, turnips, parsnips, squashes, butternut squash soup is one of my favorites in the fall. Carrot ginger soup, which is just so easy and delicious, is one of my favorites.
I find myself in the fall wanting like a cooked apple with cinnamon on it or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my favorite. I love sauteing a little ghee with an apple and cinnamon or cardamom. So cooked fruit or stewed fruit would be really awesome at this time. And we want to start to stay away from and lessen our raw fruits and vegetables. So in the summer, we might be able to have a little bit more salad or cooling foods. We don't want to do that in the fall as much because it'll aggravate Vata, that's windy quality within the body.
You know, Anjali, you're just reminding me, we've been working on this project together for several years now, and I'm not giving up on it. We're still going. For our yoga therapy school, you made recipes for the different seasons. Like you literally made special recipes just for us. So I think, I don't know if we have,
I think we've done 3 of the 4. Yeah.
We've done 3 of the 4 seasons.
Yeah.
We got to finish that project and get that book out.
Let's do it.
It just occurred to me. I'm like, oh my God, we're 3/4 of the way through this thing that we're doing. But those recipes, when we had our retreat center before COVID, we actually made the recipes together based on the seasons, and they were so nourishing and so delicious. I have to go and get my fall recipes out from you.
And yeah, and I think honestly, it's so much easier to just see a recipe in a picture than to try to remember the food list and all of this complicated, what's going on with my Agni and what doshas are here.
Well, and you made each recipe so simple. I mean, my guidelines when I asked you to help me with the project were, I don't have a lot of time. I'm not a great cook. Can you just make me simple, easy, nourishing foods for each season? And I think you totally accomplished that. So let's finish that.
I think that's so important. It's supposed to be simple and nourishing. It doesn't have to be complicated. It really doesn't. And I think that that's where we get intimidated by changing our diets and our food, because especially with social media and food blogs and all of this kind of food culture that we've created, we can make it seem really complicated, and it really doesn't have to be.
Well, and the way that I asked, or maybe you came up with, I can't remember which way it went, I just needed like 6 or 7 recipes that I could rotate for that season. Right. So that I know what's in there. I know how to cook it. I don't have to think about it. And not that that's the only thing I would eat, but those would be my staples for that season, these are my go-tos, and I love every single one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, changing your closet for the season. You have your staples, you buy your coat and your scarf, and that's your staple.
I was just thinking of that I want to get bins with each season of clothing, and then put and so that I can flip the bin out. Like it's kind of like that, right? That your food should be that easy. You just get the new bin out and here's what we eat in the fall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll have another transition between fall and winter where we have to be kind of gentle with ourselves and go back to simplicity.
Exactly. Right? And that one, in the fall for Vata, we're eating these nourishing kind of heavier foods to help us feel grounded, good whole grains, root vegetables, healthy fats. And then as we start to transition to kapha, to the springtime, we want to start thinking about lightening again. So maybe in that joint in between them, we start bringing in, like you said, more hot water, but maybe hot water with a little ginger in it to do that at the transition. And then in the springtime, we get all of these beautiful, like bitter greens that start to come available, these like radicchio and dandelion greens. And the bitter taste is really important for kapha. And in the springtime, for some reason, I always think about certain colors. I always think about gold and purple are colors that really show up at that time. So thinking about herbal teas that might have those colors, like lavender or California poppy, these really kind of mild herbs that will help us settle a little bit in the springtime. And in that time, we again want to have some of these digestive spices like ginger and turmeric, but we might start lessening the healthy fats and increasing that more with bitter greens that would have been a little bit challenging for vata are now really beneficial for kapha to start coming out of hibernation, to start moving, to start finding this motivation in the springtime. So we want to find foods that help support us at that time of year, like a mung bean soup. Barley is fantastic for kapha. There's different thoughts in the Ayurveda world, but citrus can be really helpful for kapha and kind of moving
like hot water with lemon or lime.
Exactly. Yeah. Or adding a lot of lemon into a lentil soup with parsley and dill to have these astringent light qualities.
I mean, the way that I have simplified it in my mind, because I just need it to be easy, is eat a lot of salads in the spring. Go ahead and eat those fruits that you love so much, the melons, the watery fruits in the summer. And then in the winter, go into the heavier foods. I mean, that in my mind, that's just how I can keep it simple. If I'm like, what do I even eat right now? Well, that's my guide.
Yeah, totally. So for me, it's like in the summer, it's a lot of cucumbers and corn. I love those. And stone fruit. I have a lot of fruit in the summertime. In the fall, it's butternut soup or carrot ginger soup. Those are my go-tos. And then in the springtime, it's lentil soup and a lot of citrus. Honestly, I put lemon and lime on everything. I don't have as much kapha in my constitution as you have, so you're probably better at the spring season.
It's interesting. I mean, we look at our birth constitution, but it doesn't, as you know, you're the expert, doesn't match up with our imbalances all the time. I mean, I find that the fall is my best season, but I find the spring to be quite difficult for me.
Yeah.
I think I have so much kapha that when we go into the kapha time of year, it's like kapha overload,
Right. Well, that's how I feel about pitta in summertime. It's my hardest season. So, yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
So anything about that joint between spring and summer that we should be aware of?
Absolutely. So in Ayurveda, that's, we're kind of still in kapha, but vata is creeping in a little bit. But as we transition from fall into winter, winter is actually when our Agni is the strongest.
Right.
So it's when our digestive fire is the most capable of eating these heavier foods. And we also see that in our circadian rhythm, we don't have as much sunlight, so we're not getting as much activity. And that's, the time when we can eat some of those heavier foods. So in that transition, as we move from fall to winter, we might want to consider again doing something like a 3-day cleanse, just to make sure that our Agni is actually getting that strong in the winter time.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times in the West, even though we say your Agni is strong, if you haven't been eating well, or if you've been under a lot of stress, that might not actually be the case. And that could be a time when, because we're more sedentary, we are actually able to find more imbalance at that time. So I would recommend definitely doing a khichdi cleanse, doing the hot water with ginger, like we mentioned, and finding things that you enjoy that are simple. So I love like steamed broccoli. And sometimes when I'm feeling heavy and my Agni isn't doing great, I might just have a steamed half a head of broccoli for dinner and keep it really simple. And I
do you think our bodies, I was going to say, do you think our bodies do better with just a simple meal like that, where it doesn't have to break down the carbs and the protein and the fats, just like broccoli. Work on
I
that.
do. I do. And of course, that it depends on how strong your fire is and if you're eating other foods and things like that. There's so many individual things that can come up, but I always say the simpler the better. Like if you could have a meal that only has 5 ingredients in it, it's probably going to be less confusing to your Agni than a meal that's got, like Thanksgiving dinner, which has 20 different, 30 different things in it.
Yeah, I have this kind of rule for myself that when life is overwhelming and I've had too much stimulus through my work or through my relationships or through the news, I can literally start to feel myself almost like puffing up. It's like I feel full. And when I feel like that, then I go to like the mono diet, meaning keep that food simple, because it's almost like my body mind cannot process any more stimuli, and putting a very complex diet on top of that, it's just too much. I can't digest it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Claudia Welch always used to say, in Ayurveda, we use opposite qualities. When something's hot, we use cold. So when life is complicated, eat simple. And it just, something about that always sticks with me. When life is complicated, eat simple. And for most of us, especially in going through what we have in the past year and a half, life can be complicated in times, whether we want it to be or not. So really simplifying, and also just to name, we live in a time when there's so much food available, right? I could get on my phone and Postmate Thai food or Ethiopian food, or, and have it here in 30 minutes. And that amount of flexibility might actually be more harmful for my constitution because I'm not focusing on these simple foods.
And what do you think of intermittent fasting? Some people say it is part of the original Ayurveda, that people did fasting, and other people are like, no, that's not what they meant. So what's your take on this, eat for 8 hours, fast for 16, or some do it 4 and 20, different people have different ways they do intermittent fasting. But what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think there's different ways of approaching it. I would say, first and foremost, if you have a lot of vata in your constitution, it's not for you. But outside of that, there are some people who do better without eating in the morning, and there are some people who do better without eating in the evening. And so for me, for example, I'm much better at skipping dinner or having a really early dinner, say at 5 o'clock. So let's say I'm done eating by 6, and then I don't eat again until 10 a.m. the next morning. That's giving me quite a few hours without food. Or my partner loves to, eat in the evening and not in the morning. So he'll have his biggest meal at 8 p.m., but then not eat till 2 or 3 the next day. So there's different ways based on your constitution where you could kind of support yourself in doing that, given that you don't have too much vata imbalance. So that would make you flighty or anxious, not having enough food in your system. Or if you have too much pitta imbalance, where actually your body needs more food or it's going to start to burn up its digestive lining. So I definitely think intermittent fasting and it's like, all of its trendiness could be a part of original Ayurveda based on your constitution and really listening to that. And again, that changes with the seasons. We shouldn't do that throughout the year.
Right. And that's where working with somebody like you could evaluate that through the bowel movements, through how you're feeling mentally, emotionally, and you could actually help us learn in the summer, you're likely to need your intermittent fasting to be more like this, but in the winter, your intermittent fasting might be a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one way that I've been thinking about it with clients too, and where it takes a little bit of honesty with ourselves, is to think about, am I a person who likes to indulge, or am I a person who has more of a tendency to restrict? Because we all have different kind of stress patterns and capacities and how we react to our stress. So if I know that I'm more of a person who indulges and eats emotionally, then maybe my work is to tone it down a little bit. But if I'm somebody who really restricts, then maybe it's about learning to enjoy food a little bit more, and so there's the doshas, there's the seasons, but then there's also just how are we dealing with life?
It's interesting. My dad, myself, and my only bio brother, it just seems that we do better with less food, meaning maybe just 2 meals a day instead of three. Do you
Mhm.
think that as we get older, is that a constitutional thing that just seems to work for us better? Or do you think everybody should have less food as they get older?
Mm, And that's such a complicated question. And I think the reason that that's complicated is because I also see so much disordered eating. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to give a blanket statement in that way, but I would say that, let's say 60% of the population, the majority, eats too much. We eat a lot of food, we consume more than we need. And there's certainly a large population that doesn't and could benefit from eating more. But in general, I think that we have a tendency to overconsume. And for a lot of us, myself included, 2 meals a day actually feels really good, and can keep us feeling light and energized. And if those 2 meals are healthy and nutritious and giving us what we need, even better. If those 2 meals are meals that make us feel full but don't quite give us the energy that we need, that's a whole different story, also. So I think the
And being
quality of the
willing to
food.
modify, right? Say you kind of plan
Yeah.
on your 2 meals, but at 8 o'clock at night, your stomach is growling. Go ahead and have a light soup or something
Hmm.
to help you sleep so you don't have insomnia.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there are, of course, our Vata friends who need to have 4 to 6 small meals a day because their Agnis can't handle two medium or big meals.
Yeah.
So everybody's constitution is going to be different, and discovering what that is really fun and also hard. Because our
Well,
food is so emotional. We love food. It's our, primary nutrition. It's our primary relationship. So,
and I think that's one of the things you really helped me with. My problem was that I didn't have a schedule. I didn't eat at the same time, similar food. I was like, I got to get to work. I'll figure it out when I get there. There was no planning. There was no preparation. It was like, I'll just figure it out on the fly. And what you helped me to understand is that there's an order and a rhythm, and how are we going to fit this into your day? Like, okay, you only
mhm.
have 10 minutes between classes as a teacher, but there needs to be some butternut squash soup waiting in a container for you that you can
Yeah.
just put down. I mean, it's not the best way to eat and run, but it's better than not having it. Right. And so
Right.
for me, that got me thinking, like, I got to soak the beans the night before, or if I get the watermelon, cut it up as soon as you get it and put it in its package,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
individual packages. And so now I'm always thinking ahead about, okay, in the next 2 or 3 days, what do we want to be eating and what do I need to shop for, cut up, prepare to get ready for those couple of days. And
Yeah,
that was a hard transition for me. I'm not going to lie.
it is. It is. And still, I'm sure for you as well as for me, when we get really busy, food goes out the window. It's really easy to lose that self-care practice. But we have an opportunity every day to try again. And
Yeah.
what's really interesting is with all of this circadian rhythm research that's coming out, we're seeing that there's now circadian genes in every organ. So your liver goes, okay, I need to go to work at, I don't know, 2 o'clock because that's the time when I go to work. And if it doesn't have the proper nutrition to do that, then it starts to throw off all of these other processes. I saw an interesting study a couple of years ago that I'm totally going to misquote, but we'll just something like, there was a group of people who were suffering from bipolar disorder, and they were taught three things. One was what time to wake up, what time to go to sleep, and to eat 3 meals a day. And what they found is just by doing that, there was a 70% reduction in their symptoms.
That's incredible.
Yeah, just by
Talk
changing
about
your food
Dinacharya,
and sleep.
right?
Right, right. And so again, it's like this idea of healing can be really simple. And sometimes when we're underwater or stressed or coming out of, a disease process, we don't trust that it's going to be that simple. We have a hard time believing that it can be that simple, but sometimes it can be.
Well, and I also think the more out of balance we are in the Vata direction, which is a lot of our psychiatric disorders like anxiety or
Mhm.
bipolar or schizoaffective or some of these, the more air and space we have, the
Mhm.
less we want that structure of go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, and eat at the same time. Like, that's almost
Truly,
impossible when you're feeling out of balance in the vata direction.
truly. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
I mean, after working
Yeah.
with you, I figured out that my Agni was turning on at 7:30 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 4:30 p.m. Like those were the times where my body was like, yes, I want food. Before working with you, I would have pushed through the 11:30 and the 4:30 to get more work done.
Mm-hmm.
But after
Mm-hmm.
working with you, I was like, no, this is my body telling me you need to put down the work. You need to come nourish yourself. Get away from the computer. Don't bring the food to the computer. Maybe even take a little rest or a walk afterwards. And I'm pretty good about that now, of just shutting down the computer and saying, no, my body, it's 11:30. My body is ready for some nourishment.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It just reminds me so much of that phrase, when we're out of balance, we crave what keeps us out of balance. And I see that so much in myself and clients and people around me. When we're really in that kind of go, go, go mode in our survival strategy, it feels so wrong to turn the computer off and, switch directions for an hour to give ourselves that rest and that break. But it is really the most important thing we can do, even though it feels really hard.
I think in my head before I thought, well, I'm going to lose my momentum and then I won't come back to this and then it won't get done and then it will drag on. But now I'm understanding, like, yes, it will get done. Yes, there will be a break and you'll come back more fresh, more clear. You'll come back to the project. So I've just had to make that change in my mind.
Yeah, it's that paradigm shift. Absolutely. And I think once you actually start to feel it and feel better, then you believe it and you want to do it. Then it's not so hard because you know it feels good.
Right. Yeah. So I want to finish up today talking about your Ayurvedic practitioner school and what you're doing and how you're doing it. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because, you and I have talked for years about yoga therapy and Ayurveda, how beautifully they go together, and we probably cannot even have one without the other. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Yeah. So I started a 600-hour Ayurvedic wellness counselor program. And what's different about my program is that I really focus on an integrative and trauma-informed lens. I feel that often our symptoms might be related to trauma, and having a language for that is really important as we're offering tools from Ayurveda, so that we're careful to not take away something that might be a resource. So my program is 600 hours, and there is a foundations class where we go through really traditional Ayurveda. We look at the Sanskrit text, we look at the Sankhya philosophy, which of course we share with yoga therapy, and we go through what is the foundation? Where is all of this knowledge and wisdom coming from? How can we have a relationship with the history of it? And then there's an integrative class where I break it up in modules like digestive allies, nervous system allies, mental health allies, and we talk about how can we bridge these practices to make them accessible for those of us who have a more modern life. Maybe we use herbs that are sustainable, that are not being overly harvested in India. Maybe we help our clients adapt to their lifestyle and different circadian rhythms. And then there's a 50-hour business course where I help clients, really build their business. I help students really build their business, but also we go over client cases and intakes. So this 600-hour program is really, it's just an introduction. As you know, there's so much to study, but these 600 hours give us a really beautiful foundation for becoming an Ayurvedic wellness counselor and being able to share and practice these diet remedies, medicines. And I believe that pairs so beautifully with yoga therapy, to be able to offer diet, lifestyle, asana practices, and, so much more than that also, but to bridge those and really support our clients in all of their different levels of being.
So you and I have had this plan for a couple of years now. We aren't sure when it's coming to full fruition, but the idea that someone could maybe take our yoga therapy, which is IAYT certification, and they could take Ayurvedic wellness counselor program and kind of merge the two, because in our program we don't cover a lot of food, we don't cover a lot of herbs. I think what you do is, very different than what we're doing, so
different and complementary. And I think being able to do those courses and hopefully become, what we're looking into is how we can have that become an Ayurvedic yoga therapist certification, so that we are really able to provide our students with this wealth of knowledge, so that they're really able to meet clients where they are and have a very large toolbox with many different options.
And that's exciting to me, to have two schools come together to get IYT certified, Ayurvedic wellness counselor certified, and Ayurvedic yoga therapist certified. That's a pretty cool gig that we're working on. So we're not quite there yet. We're working on it. It will. Don't you think in the next year we'll have it ready to go?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. And I think also just, getting to, I think there's a very special synergy between us, and being able to share in that would be really lovely to share that with more and more people. It's a different kind of embodiment of the practices, I find, and I really like that.
Well, and one last thing about your program, I think you're 100% online right now. Are you?
Right now it is, yeah, because of COVID. I'm hoping, so it'll be a hybrid model where some students are able to come in person if they are able to, and some will be online. So it should always be available online.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I also thought, and this is what I got excited about, aren't you planning as soon as, you can with COVID, who knows when that will be, but like 7 or 8 day module where you go and live in a house together and cook meals together. I mean, that's kind of the plan once we can get through COVID. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I want. Yeah, to be able to cook together, do our Dinacharya, our morning practice together, to learn how to touch each other's pulse and see what we can find in the pulse. Ayurveda can be learned online, but it's not the same. When somebody's making you khichdi and you can smell the spices and see it and taste it and have it done in front of you, it's so different and so magical and so special.
And would that be like 4 1-week modules eventually, the way you originally had it conceived? It was like 4 times per year.
Yeah, the original was 4 times per year, once in each season, and it would be a 4-day long weekend module. But I'm looking at a new cohort in February, which might be structured a little bit differently, just because I know it's hard for people to meet up 4 times a year. But
because I'm seriously considering, when you get those dates on the calendar, blocking that off and coming every time as a reset, as a reminder. That. I know I have to get my head around taking that much time off work, which it isn't really taking time off work, is it? But to allow myself the days to come do that and get those routines repeated over and over and over. That's my goal. We'll see.
Yeah. And I have to say, going through this first cohort with my students and watching them learn all of this information, but apply it to themselves, has been the most amazing part. To watch people over the past 15 months develop a morning routine, develop their own cooking skills, develop all of these things that we know are good for us, but now we have a weekly check-in. Hey, did you wake up at 6 and scrape your tongue? All of these things. It's so beautiful to watch.
And that's why I think a program where you have all the seasons and you have connection with the students. I mean, right now your program is very tailored towards small groups and really getting to know each other and be with one another and do that check-in. Hey, who slept in all week? I think don't you think that's originally how it was supposed to be? These intimate connections.
Yeah, I think so. And that's what I enjoy. That's how I like to learn. So I'm trying to keep it in that fashion, because I know that's what benefits me as well. So if it benefits me, it's got to benefit others as well.
Absolutely. Well, I am thrilled to be on this journey with you as a colleague and a friend. And I would like you to tell us how we can find you, what's coming up for you that we might want to join you. Do you have a website? Do you have Instagram? Do you have Facebook? All of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on rootedrasa.com. So rooted like a root vegetable, ED, Rasa, RASA, like our taste.com. That's my website. And anything that I'm teaching goes up on the website. You can sign up for my newsletter there. But Instagram is also a really easy way to stay in contact. And that's just at Anjali, Anjali. Sometimes other people pop up, but look for Anjali Deva and you'll find me on there. And things that are coming up, I'm really excited. I'm thinking about a few different online cooking classes that I might want to offer. So if you're at home in the fall and wanting to make some easy, simple fall recipes, that might be a good way to stay in touch. And then, of course, the launch of the next program. So
which is coming your next cohort is in February.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so it would go like February through almost December each year?
February, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming. I know you're a very busy woman, and I appreciate you're taking the time to really give us an education today, taking us through that whole year cycle. On some level, it's like, yeah, now that's what we need to do. But on another level, it's like, okay, how do I apply that? And that's where I think maybe you do privates with people also, right?
I do. Yeah. I have a private practice and I see people virtually around the world or also in person if you're in LA and comfortable with meeting in person. But it's been such a pleasure, Amy. I love all of the work that we do and I love chatting with you. It's really one of my favorite things.
Thank you. So I've just finished interviewing Anjali Deva, and I'm reminded of how early on in our lives our relationship with food is established. I was thinking about how when I was little, we didn't get sugar. That was just not a thing. There was no sugar in our house. I'm not sure why, but there just wasn't. And so when I would go over to the neighbor's house, who was also named Amy, she had this roundabout thing that had every kind of amazing sugar you could imagine, gummy bears and Snickers. And so we would go into her house, and the first thing I'd want to see is that roundabout cabinet where I could spin it and look at all the wonderful sugar and wonder when we were going to get some of that. We weren't allowed to just go in there and chow down. We had to play for a while, and eventually there would be a snack, and then her mom would bring out whatever it was we got for the day, and that was like a really exciting thing. And that idea of sugar is special, sugar is yummy. Now I know all the biochemistry associated with that and how much serotonin gets pumped out when we have that sugar, and that it's not just a weak willpower, that there's actually chemical changes happening in our body. But that kind of setup with a reward system, right? You girls go play for a few hours and stay out of my hair and be good girls. Don't cause any problems. And then you'll probably get some sugar, right? Those ideas are very, very deeply ingrained, not only into our psyche, but into our emotions, into our nervous system, into our endocrine system. I mean, if we think about these messages that we have about food, it's a big deal. It sets the stage for our relationship with food for our life. Another thing that I was reminded by today, I was the youngest child of 6. And 4 of the 6 were big, hungry football players. My 4 older brothers were all just magnificent athletes and really hungry guys. So, when we go to the table, of course, my parents made enough food for all of us, but there was really this idea of you better get your share. You better not wait too long because it's going to be gone. So get it on your plate and eat it as fast as you can. And I remember my brothers like literally shoveling lasagna into their mouths in like 5 seconds flat, right? So that idea of let's eat fast, let's make sure we get some. There's not going to be enough. You might not get any. So you better have a little extra. That also gets imprinted into one's psyche. And I'm sure all of you have different stories about your relationship with food and how it came to be. What I didn't really understand until I went into yoga and Ayurveda is that setup when I was little continued into midlife, into adulthood, and now into postmenopausal years, right? That I cannot continue the same food patterns I had as an 8-year-old or even a 16-year-old when I was running track and field 4 hours a day. I can't continue that into my 50s. That's just not going to work. And so when I decided to work with Anjali a few years ago to really kind of revamp, who am I? How do I nourish myself? How can I feel light? How can I feel good in my body? How can I not feel embarrassed publicly about my weight or whatever it is? That was a really critical turning point for me in life. And I think everyone needs to do that. I wish we would teach children this in school, but if we don't usually. So maybe if you went to a Montessori school or something, you would get that. But I really think everyone needs to kind of invest in this. I think it's an investment. At the time that I decided to revamp, I was in chronic pain. I was working too hard. I was too stressed out, and I wasn't making food a priority. And what I've learned since then is that my sleep and my food and my hydration, those are the 3 legs on the table of Amy. If sleep doesn't happen, I go to bed at 9 o'clock every night. I get up at around 4:30 or 5 every morning. Solid. Hydration. I'm a very hot person. I talk a lot, so I need a ton of fluids. And so I've learned, like, all day long, pump fluids. And then the 3rd leg is eat at regular times. My Agni is ready to go at 7:30 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 4:30 p.m. And then I really don't need to eat in the evenings, which is nice. But since I've honored that schedule and had very specific times that I eat and specific things, like for breakfast, I have oatmeal with a little bit of ghee and some type of fruit that has a peel on it because I want some extra fiber. And I also throw some oat bran in there. That is the most delicious breakfast. It sustains me. It's so healthy. I get most of the fiber I need for the day, right? So just having those staples that I just know I can count on, that's what it meant to me to reestablish my relationship with food. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I hope you'll go back and kind of re-examine how you came to have the relationship with food that you have, and maybe even consider a refinement or reestablishing that relationship as the foundation of your mental health. All right. Have a great day. Thank you for listening. And if you can, remember to give us a really nice rating if you're enjoying this podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms, especially Apple. There's a place where you can put a review. That would help us tremendously. We're at over 5,000 downloads now. Just a few months into the podcast, we're having really great listening, and we want to keep growing and getting these messages out there. So thank you for your support, and we really appreciate you as our listener. Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler podcast. Another nonprofit organization that we like to support through this podcast is the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandram in Chennai, India. They are the source for the teachings of the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, and we are so grateful. The KYM's Mitra division offers free yoga therapy training to a large number of socially and economically underprivileged children and women in Chennai. Feel free to support them through the link listed below on Red Circle, and we also have details on our website, which is also listed below. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. And Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.